Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, Vanda Van Graff, here at the Ecology Cinema, which is really looking worse every single episode. Tonight, with my lovely co-host, Bonsert Boku. Say hi, Bonsert. And
Yes.
don't you dare to do the stupid joke of saying hi.
Actually, I am trying to kill that thing that's in my beer can right now, and
How did it get in there? Just
I
I
don't
don't know.
know.
Why
I
am I even
mean,
asking? Why am I even asking? We're in ecology.
well, yeah. I mean, we've got
Uh,
like a big pile of beer cans that you never cleaned up, as you
I
should have
don't
done.
drink beer. I don't drink beer. Sorry.
Yes, but
You're the
then
one.
you still need to clean it up because I'm sure as hell not gonna do it.
Well, I'm not gonna do it either. Wait, was it a knock at the door?
What was that a knock?
Does
Who's
anybody even
there?
know the way to this place? Isn't this place like extremely secluded?
Eh? Is
Hmm?
anyone there?
Hello? Come in. The guards clearly didn't bother stopping you. You even have
Hello.
guards? Oh, hello there, sir. The bouncer, do you know this guy?
No, I do not. Good day, sir. Who are you?
Hello. Well, I'm a fellow cinephile, and I'm a collector of accents.
Oh,
And
Oh.
we're
really?
about to watch a movie. We're about to watch a movie that has many different accents.
Oh, yes. Oh.
Would you like a brief guide on how to do an Irish accent, a Russian accent, and a German accent for an animated movie?
I mean, we surely could do that, but now I know who Dankert sends in all the time to give us the movies. So he's
Hmm?
the guy.
No, but
Oh.
I'm fine with it. I'm fine with it. We
Yeah,
can have.
sure, come in.
Yeah, sure. Okay, let's go watch it. What's the movie you have here, sir?
Oh, you're going to absolutely love it. This is War of the Worlds: Goliath.
Ooh.
It is an
Oh,
I've heard.
it is an animated
Mm-hmm.
reimagining slash sequel to H.G. Wells's famous sci-fi classic, and it
Oh.
features an international cast with a absolute cavalcade of accents.
Yes, I've noticed. Of which the
okay.
Slavic accent actually insulted me.
All right, but okay, let's watch this, and then we're gonna
Yeah,
do the
sure, sure.
typical what's that sound called again?
The typical, I don't know,
You know
cultist
the
clap.
thing.
Oh yeah, just put in a transition vendor. Okay, okay, I get it. More editing for me.
Exactly.
Okay.
And now we'll pretend we have watched the movie.
We do.
Hmm.
Okay, so what do you guys have to say about this?
Um. Well, what do I have to say about it? Well, it has indeed a very interesting collection of Hollywood accents.
True.
Absolutely true.
Hmm.
Um, quite honest, I found it underwhelming, and yeah. Well, what are your thoughts, gentlemen?
I it's a decent movie. Like given its audience, it's meant for younger audiences. I'd say.
I
It remind like the art style reminds me a lot. Is this the same studio that did those Ben 10 cartoons back in the day? Because it looks very similar to that.
really,
I haven't
I
watched
was
those in
more
ages.
reminded of the Batman things. I
Yes,
did
those
not
as
check
well.
much of the history about it. I think this was a crowdfunded project, but maybe or guest
Maybe,
here knows,
maybe.
or Xenophile.
Well, what we do know about it is that several of the animators that worked on this movie actually worked on the television series Gargoyles for Disney, which came out about 7 years before.
Mm-hmm.
That's you can see that in the a lot of the animation models on the faces and stuff like
Yes,
that.
Yes.
yes. Although I do have
Exactly.
to point out there were some points where the animation didn't hold up too well. I mean, some scenes where it was like a crowd cheering and some guy just kept his mouth open all the time. It was just a bit funny to look at. You know, just
I,
it's,
that's
Well,
funny. I actually
hmm?
approaching this as a for me personally as a father and also as a teacher and also as a lover of H.G. Wells's book. I
Uh-huh.
actually really enjoyed this movie quite a
Fair
bit.
enough.
I did. I thought a few things. I thought the opening credits were very, very, very creative. The way that it galloped through a lot of time period, a lot of with every sort of sepia toned drawing. I think it did a really nice job of doing the parallel plotting of the young boy named Wells, with the impending Martian invasion. I thought that was really, really nicely done.
True.
Right.
I thought that was very, very artfully done. And then the other thing that I thought was quite interesting when it actually got going was I've become very, very, very fascinated with steampunk movies that start out in the classic steampunk era, the sort of late 1800s, but then flash forward several years into another era, and what they do is they build upon the steampunk motifs and the steampunk aesthetic, and then we see what they try to do with it. And I thought that was very interesting. I thought that was very interesting that they begin in 1899. They begin in the classic right in the middle of H.G. Wells's novel, and then they flash forward several decades to around the time of World War I. And I thought that was very, very, very interesting just to begin with.
I will say that I enjoy such motifs as well, and it's something that I also hope to do for my own stuff. But yeah, I'm not sure. I had something on my mind, but I forgot what it was. What are your thoughts on the beginning, Fender?
Actually, well, Sean has taken the words out of my mouth. It's really artfully done, and I love the sepia tones. How it slowly progresses to the current. Well, not the current, but the start of the movie, where we end up with. I forgot the. I enjoyed the movie, but I really forgot the names. I didn't care about the names. I cared about the clothing. I remember Roosevelt. I remember Tesla, but bloody hell, the names were.
Oh my god! When I saw Tesla, I really wanted to slap my hand on the fucking desk if I was not standing at the time.
It's like I really like Roosevelt being there because Roosevelt is underrepresented, but Tesla is just like such a cliche.
I'm
not
so sick and tired of seeing Tesla in everything. Oh god, I really am.
And being of Slavic descent, his accent was beyond bad, and the Germans were also.
Oh yeah, it was Hollywood German, as we discussed in the Rocketeer film. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely right. It just put V's in everything. Put V's in everything.
Yeah,
what are we going to do? We need to fly, right? Yeah. That's the classic Hollywood German, right? It's not like none of the inflections are correct, but they put V's in everything, and then for you have what's interesting. You have Matt Letcher, who is actually an American actor, very talented. He was the villain in the very first Zorro movie, I think, The Mask of Zorro, and opposite Antonio Banderas, he played a cavalry officer who is the villain. He's very, very good. And he also played Ambassador Stevens in Michael Bay's movie 13 Hours about the attack on Benghazi. Very talented actor, but also extremely American. And they had him do the voice for Manfred von Richthofen, which I loved. I loved seeing Manfred von Richthofen in this. I thought that was really, really wonderful. But he's not German. He's not a German actor. No, and so the accent that he did was obviously, again, Hollywood German, but the kids that I watched this movie with about 4 other kids sitting on the couch, and they loved it. They thought that it was wonderful.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things. First of all, you said it was for kids, and I was like, because the writing is like indeed for kids, but the levels of violence, how people die a lot, and how graphic it is, I was like, really, is this for kids or adults? Because the writing, I'd say yes, the writing is for kids, especially the first half, which I thought was a complete bore. I like the Green Man reference in the cafe, which I'm pretty sure most people would have missed, but that was a nice little touch. But I thought the writing was like, I expected to see a film about pulp heroes fighting aliens, and what I got was kinda an afternoon special that got someone interesting by the end of the first half, and yeah, then the film lost me again. So
it does. It definitely has some the violence level. I agree, and it definitely has some darker themes. The four, I mean, they were all boys. These were all like 10 years old, 11 years old, and they all thought that it was awesome. The violence didn't bother them at all, and the thing that it does, however, have some surprising. Obviously, a lot of people die. They disintegrate, obviously, hit by the death rays, and then in the second half, when you have the character voiced by Adam Baldwin, he's the American that they find, the crazy American that they find at the facility.
Oh, right.
Who has the severed body part of
that was probably the most interesting character in the film.
Exactly. Yeah, it was very interesting. He that actor is Adam Baldwin, who we famous for Firefly and numerous other Hollywood movies.
Is he related to Alec Baldwin?
I don't believe that he is. Alec Baldwin and William Baldwin are related, and then there's another one named Adam. No, there's Stephen Baldwin, there's Alec Baldwin, and there's William. But then there's Adam Baldwin, who is not related to any of them, which is incredibly confusing.
Yeah.
But yeah, he played Jane, the character Jane in Firefly, the show Firefly that went for about one season.
Yeah,
and he's very good in that show. And I recognized his voice immediately when it came out. I thought his voice acting was very distinctive. His character was very interesting.
It was the only character that actually had a character, in my opinion.
I agree.
But
yeah, the others were a bit stereotypical, you could say, or well, it's not that they're stereotypical. It's just that the characters are cliches to some degree. You could, if you.
Well, let's go through them real quick. We have Wells, right, named after the author, who is obviously he's we see his parents die in the opening scene. Spoiler alert, right?
Yeah, the guy I will call him Commander Plot Armor because
exactly right, because for some reason it then he's trying to avenge his parents, his childhood trauma, and so he's our stand-in for a hero.
Yeah.
He's certainly not the most dynamic of the characters, but he's sort of your classic placeholder that you often see in many of these stories. And then you have Adrian Paul of Highlander, the TV show fame, who plays the Irishman, and again, he's doing an Irish accent. And someone once taught me that if you want to do an Irish accent, you add a now or a then at the beginning and the end of every sentence. Now we're going to fight some aliens. Then we're going to fight some aliens now.
No, right.
Exactly. It actually right. And so Adrian Paul, who I believe is not Irish, I think he's actually I'm not sure exactly what his background is, but he's done a whole bunch of movies. But playing Duncan MacLeod was obviously his most famous role. He plays that character who is given quite a few scenes to confront his brother, who's more of an IRA extremist. But it doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't really have much of an arc. He has a couple of scenes where it's addressed, but it's never developed. It never comes to any plot conclusion.
Right.
But and one of the boys that I was watching the movie with just remarked that they thought that was interesting, but they thought that there were a couple of scenes missing. That the Irish never became a threat. They never really went anywhere.
Yeah.
But they did think it was interesting that they were at least trying to develop that guy's character a little bit when he walks away from his brother to join the fight. But it doesn't really that doesn't unfortunately get enough screen time to come to any meaningful conclusion. Whereas Adam Baldwin's character, he shows up for I think about 10 minutes and he goes through like a whole character arc. He goes from being this like crazy loner to sacrificing himself for these strangers. And you're like, okay, I missed that guy. I missed that guy already.
Yeah.
And if I may add, like the whole arc with the Irish, with the brothers, It's something similar to what happened in Dark Shadows from Tim Burton that you reviewed
Yeah,
last
I
week.
was reminded of that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it went nowhere. That's the thing. It started so many things, and then it went nowhere
Yeah,
with those things.
well, if I would have done this film, I would have made it like half an hour. I would have focused on a single scene and make that scene as awesome as possible, like Astartes. I mean, Astartes has like episodes of like 2-3 minutes, and they're awesome. You're engaged all the way through. The fighting animation is the best I've ever seen, and it's freely available on or it was freely available on YouTube because Games Workshop killed it. But I mean,
No, Games Workshop didn't kill it. They're actually making a movie with the guy that made Astartes.
you know, if they do the same work as on Bolt and Chain, then
Yeah, then it's not gonna be good. But let's hope this one is going to be good because this guy is actually talented.
At least we have the original Astartes, right?
Yeah.
But I think they should have gone for something like that. Because the fight scenes is literally, you have tripods at one side, you've got the other tripods at one side, they're shooting at each other, the sound effects are like, all the explosions are like those are the explosions. And nothing really happens. You know, tanks explode, but there is no.
It's like a Star Wars. It's like a big Star Wars battle in the new trilogy. You could compare it to that.
Yes, it's literally they just two sides shooting at each other. Tanks
Never
explode,
hitting.
and that's about the extent of the action. And that was like, if you guys just made a half an hour movie, because they've got like these awesome 3-legged tanks. And they might just have been normal tanks because the legs don't play a role in the combat whatsoever. It's never explored. What you know? It's awesome to see all these multi-barrel turrets and stuff. Awesome, but and you know, for kids, perfect. You know, but for me, I'm like, really, you've got such awesome vehicle designs, and all you're doing is you put them up like a board game up to each other, and then you roll the dice and see who kills the other guys first.
Yeah, I agree with that. Also, you should know that an 11 and a 12-year-old both agree with you. They thought that the designs were very promising when the Ares designs were first unveiled, but the problem is that they didn't really use. There weren't a lot of tactics used during the combat. It was a lot of we shoot them, they shoot us, and it really becomes who ends up shooting more first, so that and then basically all of the it's basically a war of attrition. It's almost like World War I tactics, but with giant robots.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Yeah,
and that was, I agree. Like there was definitely a sense of oh, there was a missed opportunity here.
Yeah,
in terms of being able to fully sort of milk that, because the aliens were using all kinds of surprise attacks, and they were moving forward, but the humans were not adequately adapting to that. They were sort of slow moving. They looked cool and they looked interesting.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the at the designs, you know, and they look amazing and detailed. Like real thought was put into this, but it's one of those typical examples of style over substance, where they have like these incredible detailed machines, and then, you know, they have to actually tell a story, and then it's like, okay, how are we gonna use this? I mean, this is such a typical mistake that amateur, you know, writers starting out make. Like, they have like, oh, I've got this awesome idea, and, you know, I have built this entire world, and then it's like, okay, now tell the story, and they're like, oh, I now have to scrap half my world because I cannot move the plot forward if I don't make these changes to the world. And that is what this feels like to me.
Well, what they do, which is laudable, is they bring in a whole lot of different nationalities. Right, you've got the Russian commander, and a Russian accent is basically just you know, thicken all of your L's. Right, and grunt. So it's, you know, we are going to destroy them, and if the character's bald, so much the better. And this character's bald. But you have a Russian commander. You've got Japanese, German, English, Irish. I mean, they really sort of they create a nice spread. and Theodore Roosevelt ends up being a pretty cool character in this movie in terms of representing the American side of it. He doesn't have much. He doesn't change that much, but it was still. I found him to be pretty cool, and it was just cool to watch TR do his thing. But then what they do is the battles aren't very imaginative. But the one thing I will say is at least they're costly. The worst is when a battle has no cost. If you have two forces clash and there's lots of gunfire exchange, if there's no cost, if people don't die, it really slackens the tension. So the one thing that I will say, I sat there literally kind of observing these four young viewers watching the movie, was combat wasn't as imaginative as it could have been, but the cost, the fact that people actually perished, sort of actually hooked them in. Which
they didn't do the G.I. Joe thing where every time a plane exploded, the parachute comes out. Yeah,
exactly. And I did appreciate that, and I do think getting back to briefly this idea of violence is that the kids, being young boys, they were like, oh cool, his face melted off. But I do think that it's better to show violence with cost than just violence, the spectacle that doesn't have cost to it, where lots of gunfire gets exchanged and there's no real consequence. I think that's actually worse.
Yeah.
True, because it doesn't really change. It doesn't really teach the fact that violence is not good. It's just like cool violence, and then
there's.
It's also boring. It is. And kids respond to it. It's boring when there's lots of shooting and no one gets hurt and no one gets hit. It's very interesting to watch younger viewers who are much more overtly emotionally responsive. You can see, like I saw young viewers leaning forward as opposed to leaning back, and they leaned forward when the stakes started to go up and people started to actually perish, which is quite interesting.
Fascinating.
Yeah, which I thought was intriguing, and I thought the combat got a little bit better. I thought when Richthofen got a chance to do his thing, the kids liked that. They thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was a straight rip off of Independence Day, but
yes,
at least they tried.
Absolutely, that's absolutely correct. But it was interesting for me. For me, what was interesting was. Just as an adult, I'm like, oh, I'm watching a World War I German ace who's now a hero in this alternate history. Like, that's interesting. And watching Theodore Roosevelt, who I know is a real character, sort of inserted into this alternate history, I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, this is kind of cool what they're doing. And one kid had done a report on the Red Baron, and so he was. It was very funny. He was chiming in with all these critique and everything else.
Yeah, I didn't get the feeling that this was the Red Baron, but as a character, for me, he was like the typical arrogant German. But I mean,
he was. It was definitely like it was sort of like a bone to throw at the sort of the either the intelligent, well-read kid or the adult who's watching it going, I see what you did there.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I was indeed like the script was clearly written for kids, and I don't know, maybe it's because I'm also far older now. Because when I was a kid, I was like, yeah, who gives a shit about violence? Violence is awesome. So I guess I wouldn't have mind like the skeletons and stuff like that, and people disintegrate. So maybe. When you're older, you look differently at that, so that's an interesting experience for me in that regard.
There was one during the final battles after you have the sort of the opening engagements, and then they get dropped in the I think in the American heartland, and they're looking for and then that's when they come across the power plant where they're building the giant.
That was when I thought it became better. I would have wanted to have seen more of that.
That was in because suddenly you're getting drawn into the plot more, and you're wondering. Here's what I thought was interesting. Was the concept of a sequel, which is our diseases won't protect us anymore.
Yeah.
Which I thought was very interesting. And now we actually have to fight them and beat them. In that way, I thought that was actually really cool. And I thought that was quite interesting because I kept waiting. But I think the one thing was I kept waiting for, okay, well, what are the aliens are going to try now that our diseases won't hurt them? and now they're back for revenge, and they've had several years to do this. What are they going to try to do? And of course, unfortunately, they build giant ships. They build giant ships that will come and bomb us. But I do think though, I appreciate the fact that they set it up and then it pays off later when the giant ship rises up out of New York Harbor. That was very cool. I thought there was one moment that I thought was really, really, really cool, which was when the airship, the good airship, the Ares airship, piloted, captained by our Russian, our Russian friend, when it submerges in the city streets to avoid the thing. I thought that was really interesting. The idea that the city was actually became almost like an ocean, and it submerged like a submarine to try to do a surprise attack on the thing. I thought that was one of those moments where I was like, you know what, that's legitimately cool. I wish they had milked it a little bit more and played with that a little bit more. But I thought that was really
it was definitely one of the scenes they put more thought into it. But what I thought was interesting is that the aliens let a building collapse on top of one of the ships.
Yes.
Something you would expect the good guys to do, because asymmetrical warfare, but it were the aliens who were like, we're gonna let this building fall on top of them. I thought that was interesting choice.
Yeah, there were moments, for example, and I it's funny, I have just to bring in another accent into this. I have an Australian friend who will watch movies together, and even if he doesn't love the movie, he'll say, good effort, mate, good effort. And I feel like there are moments in this movie where it's not great, but there are moments where I'm like, good effort, mate, good effort. They were trying stuff. For example, like when before the Russian captain perishes, you find out that the young man that was with him, sort of alongside him, turned out to be his son, which I thought was interesting. And again, like the Irish thing, it doesn't go fully anywhere, but at least they're trying something. And Theodore Roosevelt with a machine gun kicking ass and actually having quite a bit of screen time. It's like, that's interesting. And the submerging of the airship, that was interesting. And the fact that the airship sacrifices itself to destroy the big bad at the end. And again, real cost, like people actually die, which I thought was quite interesting. And I, if I'm remembering, I think there's also a moment where Theodore Roosevelt's fighting and someone like literally dies right next to him. And I thought to myself, I'm like, okay, good effort, mate. And that's what, when I'm sitting there watching it, and I was watching the screen, but also watching the couch with with our test audience. It was interesting to see that they were like, oh, and they were responding like, I think they were surprised that a cartoon was going as hardcore as that. I think they were surprised.
Is there something you wanted to say, Fender? Because I want to comment on that too, but we've been talking now for a while.
You can go first. I'm just listening in on your comments so I can give my own later on.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, because what I was reminded of when you mentioned about, showing the cast, like, of course, there's a really big difference between, like, watching a vehicle just blow up or seeing the crew of that vehicle get disintegrated. I was reminded of an anime, one of the Gundam series. I don't know which one it was, but it was one that involved a lot of child soldiers.
If I may comment, it reminded me stylistically of Akira, the anime.
Yeah. Moments of it, yeah. Some of the big bulbous explosions that were kind of rounded at the edges of it. Yeah, I agree. There were definitely moments.
For those that don't know Akira, go look up. The first thing that comes up when you look it up is probably one of the most disgusting transformation scenes in a cartoon ever. If you remember that scene. So if you're interested, go look that up. I hate the scene till this day. Disgusting, absolutely repulsive.
I think I know which one you mean.
Yeah.
It's that transformation near the end. It's that by the way, this same group that watched this movie also watched Akira, and they obviously recognize that Akira is clearly superior in every way.
Definitely.
But what they did was they also, it was the same thing. They thought that what was very compelling about it's very, very interesting when if they were never disturbed by. They thought it was really fascinating because for them, they thought that it was a really amazing representation of some of the very volatile emotions that they have inside of them. Mm-hmm. And so they thought that that was compelling. And again, they liked that whenever something violent happened, it kind of grounded it in reality, and they really liked that a lot. Yeah. They liked that about both films. I was going to mention Gundam and anime in comparison with War of the Worlds Goliath, because I think that they were trying to evoke a lot of that stuff, and they don't do it as well. Yeah, and they were trying. They were putting in an effort. They didn't always pull it off, but the one thing that I do think that they pulled off was at least creating sort of just the necessary stakes, because people were just getting knocked off. They were just getting clipped one after the other, and that was come out. The only person who obviously had plot armor was Wells.
I'd say Roosevelt a bit as well.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, Roosevelt. I wonder if they considered killing him, and then they're like, "Nah, we're not going to do that."
Roosevelt doesn't die. That guy got shot and he got through it. He's badass.
Oh, imagine what the Iron Chancellor would have been like.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. I remember coming away from it thinking, "Wow, Teddy Roosevelt, they did a good job with him." You know, that was pretty cool. And I thought that the sacrificing of the airship, the multiple casualties, Adam Baldwin's very interesting cameo as a sort of a deranged but sympathetic character was interesting. Adrian Paul, they at least gave him something to do with the Irish thing. They were trying a bunch of things. I agree with you about the combat. The combat was a bit static.
By the way, that finger, that could have been a Mary Shelley reference. I wonder, because she did the same thing with her husband's heart, something like that.
Yeah, I thought the same thing when I was watching it. I was like, you know what? That's okay. There's something very kind of 19th century Gothic.
Yeah.
Interesting. It was very interesting at the same time.
Yeah, but there's also like before the scene enters the bar at the beginning of the film, they show the face of the Green Man, the mythical Green Man, which is the representation of approaching death and rebirth. Mm-hmm. So that was an interesting reference. What else? About the Gundam, I was reminded of a particular scene in one of the Gundam series, which was about these child soldiers, and they were fighting in a kind of a trike tanks, I guess you could call them, like three-wheeled tanks, and they were on this operation where there was like a time limit. Because of politics, they needed to take a particular place in a certain amount of time, so they had to do this almost suicidal charge across a bridge. And because you've been with these child soldiers all this time, you know that these child soldiers are piloting these vehicles, and then you see one trying to cross the bridge, and the trike explodes, and then you're like, and it's just a toy vehicle when you see it on screen, but you realize, like, that's a kid in there. You know, you're constantly with that thought. Oh, there's a kid in there that's now horrifically disintegrated.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation to have creatively.
Yeah.
About anything, about the idea of how do you maintain real tension and stakes in your story, and I think that. One thing I think has occurred, certainly in Hollywood blockbusters, but I think it's epidemic across a lot of animation and a lot of television, is there's just too much gunfire where nobody gets hit. Yeah. There's too much gunfire where people shoot at each other and there's no consequence.
Yeah. And
even in a show, this was at this point, almost, this is a decade ago, but even the show 24 with Kiefer Sutherland, for example, there were, and that was a show that did a good job of keeping the stakes high. There were too many, people with automatic weapons shooting at each other, and nobody gets hit, good or bad, or if they do, you don't really see it. And I think the problem is that it belies, it actually takes you out of the fact of how powerful these weapons actually are. And the one thing that I thought was good about War of the Worlds Goliath was when the missiles hit, when the bullets hit, when the disintegrated hit, there was real impact. Like there was never a moment where every time a weapon hit, there was an impact where you saw someone get hurt or killed or maimed or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a good way to just sort of maintain that tension the whole time, because the moment you start having rockets or bullets just sort of either bouncing off or missing or blowing up and nothing happens, it's almost like you're setting off firecrackers, like nobody cares.
Yeah, and it's a bit cartoonish.
Well, it is. It's also just, even in the Marvel movies, for example, one of the problems is you get this problem of scale, right? Which is, you have a bunch of men in suits with 45 caliber handguns, but you're like, they don't do anything. They're totally ineffectual, and as a result, it's like you're sort of dismissive because you have something more superhuman going on. Well, okay, fine, but a bunch of guys carrying 45 caliber pistols could actually inflict a lot of damage on pretty much anything. And so I think the one thing I give this very flawed movie credit for is, the whole time when people start shooting, stuff actually happened, and there was that real sense of, the either projectiles or energy weapons were the impacts were landing. And I find that most, especially young viewers, because I mean, a lot of what I do is I pop in something on the big screen TV, and my kids and their friends are all sitting there, right? And I watch them watching things, and I find that they get bored, not even when the story slows down. They get bored when the tension
goes
unravels.
down. Yeah.
Yeah, that's when they get bored. But they get bored when they're like, okay, they're shooting, but like, because kids tend to kind of tune things out pretty quickly, unless there's real impact.
Yeah.
And
has your to call it test group watched any of the Studio Ghibli movies yet? Because those I think they would love. Have they watched La Puta Casa in the Sky? We did a review on that.
No, they haven't watched that one yet.
They need
so
to.
far.
They need to.
Yeah, their favorite one so far that they really enjoyed was Nausicaa, Valley of the Wind.
Oh,
they really
I have not seen that one yet.
I remember watching it, but it was such a long time ago. I need to rewatch it. Put it on the bucket list, sponsor.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I actually watched it when it was the American version called Warriors of the Wind, which is a different sound voice dub and a slight edit. And I thought it was very good then. And then I have the Nausicaa, the latest definitive version with Patrick Stewart, I think, is in it, and a bunch of other. Uma Thurman, I think, is also one of the voice actresses as well. And it's very good. It's very good. But that's a pretty violent adventure. There's a lot that goes on there. But again, it was the same thing. It was the same thing where when the shooting starts and when the sword starts swinging, you can feel it. You're waiting. The way that it feels, obviously, when real violence occurs is the air suddenly kind of distorts, and you're like, oh, what's happening? And so that was really cool. They really enjoyed that. They thought that was very good. And this is a half a dozen. At the time, it was half a dozen boys, and they watched it, and it was a female protagonist, and they loved it. Thought it was awesome. So but the key is Studio Ghibli. I know you know this, but one thing they do very well is kinetic impact and consequence, right? Every arrow, every firebomb, every bullet, it lands, and they really do a great job of showing the impact and the consequence, and things don't. It's basically very, very rapid change. Characters evolve very rapidly after fights because so much happens in such a short period of time.
Well, my standard for violence, my benchmark currently is Astartes, which is our very short videos about essentially space marines entering a rebel barge that has a particular secret in it. And there's barely any monologue or dialogue, barely any lines. It's just, them showing how they board a ship, blow everything apart. I don't know how familiar you are with Space Marines and the Warhammer universe, Sean.
I am. They're fantastic.
Yeah, and I mean, Astartes is probably one of the best depictions of Space Marines Like the weapons feel real, the way how they fight feels real, how they their reflexes and how they use weapons. Everything is beautifully animated and it's short, it's to the point, and it's just everything feels that it has weight, and it is like made by one guy, and it's like the best. The best 3D animation I've ever seen, including like big blockbuster movies, and it's incredible how it's actually feels like you're dealing with Marines that they're like far taller than humans, and they're just slaughtering everything that's not them essentially, and it's great. Another series that has some nice scenes in that, like, well, is Vander, do you know what that one is called? That one about the Horus Heresy, also 3D animated by a fan. Like
Talking about, but I've forgotten the name.
Lost Hope or something like that, or the Death of Hope.
I think
Is this also a Warhammer video?
Yeah, this is also Warhammer, also 3D, and it shows a scene from the Horus Heresy. So you've got like the Space Marine legions, in cataphract armor walking around and shooting at each other, fighting Khorne berserkers, and well, they're not yet Khorne berserkers; they're still Space Marines, but they're heretics.
If I could get back for a moment, sorry to interrupt you there, but just to get back at Studio Ghibli for a few moments. Did you guys know that it actually, after shutting down in 2014, it relaunched? Are you familiar with that?
I have not followed that. I didn't even know they shut down.
Well, it did relaunch on the new direction, and I am sad to say it's not looking good.
Okay.
That's too bad.
Yeah,
I know that they released a sort of the definitive collection.
Yeah.
My wife and I, we own 2 of them. We of all the Blu-rays and stuff like that, and I know that the founder Miyazaki, I think he did one final film, and then I remember watching that in the movie theater, and I think that he either stepped away or he is deceased. I don't know.
I think he is deceased.
I think
he's quite old.
They brought out Ervik and The Witch in 2020, and people are not happy with it. It's a 3D animated movie.
Yeah, that's getting away from what they did, which was all the hand-drawn stuff.
Yeah, and and there's another movie is coming up 2023 supposedly, but
no, apparently he's still alive.
Yeah, he like here's what Miyazaki thought about the movie. I've been made to carry the destiny of only making feature-length theatrical work, so I thought I can't direct Ervik. So the movie is not directed by him, so that explains why it's probably not as well received.
Yeah, he has a very distinctive style.
Definitely.
Always has. I think the one thing you can say about Goliath is that Goliath doesn't quite have an entire voice of its own.
Yeah,
it's borrowed from several other voices. That's what I think. I mean, for example, I mentioned gargoyles. For example, the designs are obviously reminiscent of Gundam and BattleTech and other aesthetics, and the large flying wing alien ships, the sort of the Leviathan ships at the end, are also I think reminiscent of some of the Tiger and a few others. So this was very much kind of a pastiche of several other artists, and they sort of glommed it all together. And obviously, then of course H.G. Wells is his whole tripod aesthetic, which is really famous too. So this one doesn't have. This one is sort of like almost like a sample album or like a compilation.
I wish they copied more from Metropolis.
Yeah. They could have taken a lot of inspiration from there, especially with the designs and.
Yeah.
Although, frankly, just regarding the designs, clothing-wise at least, in the aspect that they kept the vintage aesthetic going, they did a quite decent job with the clothing. And especially like Roosevelt's appearance, because well, it was what you were given the time period. I just the fighter uniforms were for me too much reminiscent of the ones from Akira, as I mentioned already. So they're not bad, but they could have made them a lot more unique, definitely. Especially given the fact that Tesla is clearly given a very important character.
Yeah.
And he would have designed those uniforms a lot more tactically and a lot more impeccably, to put it the least. So a bit disappointed in that regard, but for an animated movie with a lot of flaws, I can at least give it some leeway in the clothing.
Okay. Adequate effort.
Yeah. Good effort.
Good effort, mate.
Because I do think, for example, what was interesting was how they tried to. It was set in like an alternate 1914, right before World War One, and you have that scene in the bar where World War One is about to start, but then the Martians attack, and so they rally in the bar and stuff like that, and everything else. And this scene is obviously it's the cheese factor is very, very high, and it's a chance to give Wells something to do, because he's not the most dynamic character. He just sort of is there for all of the most important scenes, but his decisions don't really affect the plot that much. No. He sort of goes from place to place, and he's sort of the observer pretty much. But I think that there's but I appreciate that they were trying to do some interesting alternative history. The thing, though, that I think this reminds me, though, getting back to tactics for a second, that I think that this is an interesting, larger conversation to have generally about when you are staging conflict, especially military level conflict, especially when you're using really interesting weaponry like those armored airships, the Ares, and and these big walkers and stuff like that. What I think is very interesting is we talk about the fact that although these battles did a good job of incurring cost, they didn't have very good tactics. And I think this is not the only movie where I've been watching and I get taken out a little bit of the action because the tactics are just so bad. And I think that that's something that it is a recurring problem in film and television, where you have battle scenes that are very, very important. They're very dramatic. And even in the case of some, the stakes have been set up pretty well. You care about the characters. But the main thing is, first of all, if you have a battle that doesn't have enough cost, it sucks because there's no tension.
Right.
But also, if you don't have battles that are prosecuted in a way where you're like, oh, that's a really good idea. Like, oh, that's really smart. That's a good use of your resources. It does, whether you're a military expert or not, whether you're into this or not, it takes you out of it a little bit. You think to yourself, there's something about this that just doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
Obviously, for example, the Game of Thrones is the Long Night battle recently was a major example of that, of just very poor tactics, didn't make any sense, and really took a lot of people out of the action. The Last Jedi, also, you had these very strange battle scenes that just didn't seem to make a lot of sense. The tactics, there were bombers in space.
And just horrible writing as a whole.
Yeah.
It's style over substance.
It's a very interesting challenge, I think, as a creative writer, when you're trying to create, okay, now it's time for a battle scene. But wait a minute. I mean, battles are fought, especially at a military level. And in the case of War of the Worlds Goliath, it was an elite military level. All of a sudden, it's like, oh wait, you actually have to design this. You actually have to incorporate tactics and strategy. And I thought that was very interesting to watch. And I was like, okay, yeah, they're not getting the tactics right. But that's why, for example, when the airship actually submerges in the city, I started to get this kind of glimmer of like, oh, that was interesting.
Yeah, well, a series who done this really well was the first season of Last Exile with airships. That is just incredible to see, and yes. Well, I actually did a retelling of the series where I also explained the tactics and how they work. And in the second season, it was kind of like an anniversary episode that was made 10 years later. It's like, oh, we're just gonna add a lot of airships in the sky, and they're gonna sail at each other, they're gonna fire at each other, and that's about it. And in Lost Exile, it's really like this chess game, and they kind of also like show, all the ships are also based on chess, by the way. Yeah, I explained this in the video series that I've made on it, which I'm pretty proud of. So, but yeah, it's really awesome how they display that, and even when I had to fill in the blanks, I could like say because of how they organized the battles, I could say, okay, well they chose this because of this, and they are doing this because they had like all these inexperienced troops, so they were like, fuck it, let's just do it, you know. So that's how they went into the battle, and I could like fill in all those blanks. And in the new Les Exile, I couldn't like make anything out of that for no bloody reason, because the characters are just dumb. The fleet combat is just inexpired. I mean, you read the comic, right? The Lights in the Dark story, where I talk about the penal troops.
Mm.
Yeah, you know, and then how I organize those vehicles. So, you know, there's so much that can be done there in design, and you know, how to approach combat, because all those vehicles had to be purposely designed. Okay, what would they do against such creatures? And I included one of them with mitrailleuses, which are like kind of like a mix between a machine gun and a rocket thrower, something like that.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And
yeah. My question is, real quickly, which is interesting, is when you were designing that, did you read any history books? Did you research any great military leaders or strategists?
I've studied military history at the university. Yes.
There you go. There you go. I feel like the makers of War of the Worlds Goliath didn't do that. And as a result, right, you have that slightly slackening tension of, right, you didn't, right, they didn't fully research what a military mind would actually do.
No, my problem with the vehicle design of World War Goliath is that they've got this force specially designed for when the Martians come back, right, but the vehicles didn't seem at all designed for that purpose.
Yeah, they mimicked the Martians, but they didn't counter the Martians well.
No, it seemed like it was designed for fighting humans.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's interesting, because the Martian tripods, right, because Wells describes in his book, he describes that the thing about the tripods was that they went very quickly. They were able to glide like over the land. It gave them a vantage point looking down on humans, so they could see pretty much everything. And even there's even a description, a moment where a shell actually hits one of the tripod legs, but the tripod leg basically it spins out, and then the thing actually he describes it almost like a ballet dancer. It recovers very quickly, and so it actually was designed to be able to absorb direct kinetic force very, very easily. And they were also very difficult to hit because of the actual tripods themselves were quite very, very difficult to aim at. And so it makes sense that the Martians would attack with those weapons. And plus, I think they also had there's vaguely there's stuff about how there's like shields and stuff around them. But in the 2005 movie with Tom Cruise by Steven Spielberg, they make it very explicit that there are force fields. But given the modern weaponry, but the thing is. But yeah, your point is well taken. Where that these are walkers, but these walkers don't have. They didn't seem very advantageous. If you're a Martian tripod,
no, not at all,
trying to attack this thing, you actually have a pretty. They basically sort of shoot each other until one goes down, and that's pretty much how it works. So
I mean, if I would design something like this, I mean, the whole walker idea. Sure, there is an advantage to walkers. I've been tackling this problem with my own automatons, the chassis de bataille in the story. Like, well, what would they use them for? Well, the only benefit is that they kind of like use the terrain more to their advantage, because they have legs that they can use to, you know, depress their guns and stuff like that. Tanks don't have that, you know. If you're in a certain range of a tank, that's it. You can no longer use your guns unless you're a tank destroyer, which is also not very advantageous in a situation where those CBs go into. So for
Yeah.
that particular type of specialized combat, there could be an advantage to such vehicles. But the walkers of Goliath are like, what? You're making a extremely large target of yourself that is very vulnerable, probably a bitch to maintain. It's not a cost-effective system at all. You're also putting weapons on that thing that clearly have no effect, like machine guns. How many machine guns did they put on there? I mean, sure, if they had like. Yeah.
Yeah, and to your point, when they were firing the machine guns and the machine guns weren't doing anything, those are the moments where I saw in my young viewers, that's when they were kind of like, because it's very odd to watch a spinning chain gun, which my boys know. I mean, they've actually seen one fired live, so they know how powerful it is. Okay, they watched a Vulcan actually fire and like shred steel. So when they're watching that and it doesn't do anything, like it does nothing. It's not that it's tearing up the Martian's armor but the Martian's still up, right? Kind of given that sense of tension. It doesn't do anything.
Yeah, nothing. Yeah.
Then you're wondering, why are they firing? And what happens is that actually took it out. But then when they started shooting the rockets and everything else, and that sort of thing started blowing up, they got back into it. But you're raising a very good point about you can't have weapons that do nothing, because a 50 caliber machine gun can penetrate. I mean, I know you know this, all kinds of armor it wreaks havoc on most organic systems.
I mean, that thing will tear your arm off. I mean,
absolutely. And Vulcan machine guns, the 20 millimeter cannons. I mean, these are very, very powerful weapons, and you have to be really careful when you marginalize. You're like, oh, it's just a machine gun, it's not going to do anything. Well, you shouldn't really do that, because it does peel away at the tension. And what it does is, I mean, we talked about this before. Illusion is all about proportion, right? In order to maintain that illusion and to keep that tension, you have to maintain things in proper proportion. And when you have 45 caliber pistols that do nothing, or Vulcan machine guns, or 50 caliber machine guns that do nothing, what you're actually doing is you're not actually raising the stakes. You're actually letting too much slack into your rope, because you're not giving a sense of any real kinesis, which is where people know that, especially boys. I mean, boys are always researching guns and tanks and all kinds of things.
Especially when they're getting into gaming like World of Tanks, man. I know how much research I did into tanks.
They're more savvy than ever, and you can't have a tank, for example, fire a shell at something and it does nothing. Right? Because
I mean, it could be a glancing blow, but then again, it would probably just slide off, hit something next to it, and then it would still explode and do some collateral damage at least.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for example, the tank movie Fury with Brad Pitt had some moments like that, where when they fired a shell and it bounced off the Tiger, and I'm like, okay, that's interesting, right? Because then they have to circle around behind it and stuff like that, because it was like, okay, you've established that this thing can blow open things with its cannon. Then you raise the stakes, and then he uses tactics to get around it. So I appreciate, although the movie's not perfect by any means.
It's actually quite historically accurate, as much as I know. If that's a German Tiger you're speaking of, those did have very heavy frontal.
They did, and the Shermans had, I think, I don't recall, but it was the millimeter gun that they had. It was not powerful enough to penetrate.
Yeah, depending on what moment in the war, but it was famously underpowered at the beginning. Well, I want to mention one thing, and then I think we are gonna end the episode. But one thing that when I was designing those CBs, and I mentioned that one of them would have like those mitrailleuses, those rocket throwers or machine guns. It was an unsuccessful weapon. In the end, but then it was like, but that weapon is very ineffective. But it's like they're an experimental unit. The whole point of the world is that they don't know what they're doing, so they're like trying all these different stuff. So there is a one CB that only has only illuminates. It just carries big lamps. There's another one that has the flamethrowers. This one. In the next story, it's gonna be converted to a recon vehicle, because Mary is gonna get a new one. Um, but yeah, but that's one of the things I like to do is to make weapons ineffective or really specialized that they only function in particular situations. Because the fun thing about that is when you put them in a situation where they're not designed for, let's say, tank destroyers, which are designed for very particular tactics. Well, they're now outside of their element, so now they have to adjust. And how are they gonna resolve that problem? You know.
Yeah.
And the tendency of too many people is, oh, we're gonna make like a vehicle and it can do anything and everything at any time, and it's like, okay, well,
Yeah, that's basically vehicle plot armor.
Yeah, essentially.
No,
but gentlemen, I think we're gonna leave it at this. Maybe we can do like a special on steampunk vehicle design or something at some point.
Definitely.
That would be awesome. That would be really awesome.
I definitely want to do something about like steampunk world building and on armies and stuff like that. And yeah, well, we'll see if we can do
design versus ineffective design.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, I prefer ineffective design because, you know, then you get asymmetrical warfare, which is often much more interesting. So, but yeah. So would you recommend this, Sean?
I would. First of all, this also has a companion novel that is available on Amazon very cheaply on Kindle, and my experience was very positive. The kids read the book, and they also watched the movie. And they actually got quite a lot out of it. So I'd say if you're a parent and you have a bunch of boys and you're looking for to give them something that is somewhat literary and will give them at least something a little bit meatier than your typical cartoon, I would say that this is pretty solid. For the more discerning adult, I would say that you're going to have the reaction that many of us have had. But overall, I was for the several boys that I showed it to, it ended up being a win.
All right, Fender.
Well, I'd have to mostly agree with Fonda. You can't really, if you've got a kids movie, you can't really expect adults to enjoy it in the same vein as kids will. Of course, kids will also notice the same issues as adults, but for kids, it's again a different experience and something that has been overdone for us or is cliche maybe isn't going to be for them, and it's probably going to be something very interesting for them to watch. Maybe they'll learn something from it, but for an adult, don't expect anything special. Like if you're a parent, watch it with your kids. Not something I'd watch in my free time though.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna join you in those statements. So I've got little to add there. Yes, Mr. The language expert, I hope you enjoyed being here and watching this with us. We hope to see you again in our cinema at some point. Don't get eaten in the meantime. And,
and make sure to check out the human washing machine if you haven't seen that yet.
Yeah,
there's the guy is still making a lucrative business out of it. He's opened up like an even bigger shop right now. He just takes the clothes in, goes behind the counter. God knows what he does with them. There's no machinery around, and they just come out clean. I'm scared. I'm scared that guy might actually take over the city. He's got a really good social capital around. I'm scared.
Yeah, it sounds like he's onto something.
Yeah.
All right. Some domestic announcements. As I already said last time, the novel and the comic are now both available and on associationofishtar.com. Sean, can you give a quick impression for the comic for our dear listeners?
Absolutely. So I would say that I read the comic. I was thrilled by it. I was very, very intrigued by especially by the very first story about tracking that mysterious sort of hybrid creature. I thought that was a really very, very well done, and I was also very, very intrigued by all the by the part 2 story as well. I think that you're really onto something with the Association of Ishtar. I think that steampunk has needed a kind of really legitimate multiverse story where anything is possible, and yet anything is possible, but at the same time, there's definitely, it feels like there's an order and that there's a forward momentum to it, which I think is the biggest achievement of what you're doing. Is that I sense that anything can happen in this world, but I also sense that there's this deep underlying story that's taking us somewhere, and that to me was the biggest thrill by the end of it.
Okay, awesome. And for those who are interested in the novel, I posted on our second channel this first chapter of the book, so you can listen to that to get an impression. It's also linked, of course, on our website as well. And yeah, I already got some amazing responses to that. So yes, and with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're gonna tell you good night, good day, and as always, make it your way. And thank you for being here, gentlemen.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Bye.